Before we begin this incredible Viking tale, don't forget to hit that like button. If you enjoy the story, subscribe to our channel for more amazing Viking adventures, and let us know in the comments where you're watching from around the world. Your support means everything to us. The morning mist clung to the rugged coastline like the breath of sleeping giants, while the village of Nordvik slowly stirred to life. Smoke began to rise from the chimneys of timber and stone houses, carrying with it the scent of burning oak and the promise of another day filled with the endless preparations for the coming winter harvest. In the furthest corner of the settlement, away from the bustling centre where merchants hawked their wares and children played between the wooden stalls, stood a modest dwelling that seemed almost forgotten by time itself. This was the home of Olaf the Seafarer and his son, a young man whose story had become both a source of whispered pity and reluctant respect among the villagers. The young warrior's name was spoken with a mixture of sympathy and admiration, for despite the challenges that fate had bestowed upon him from birth, he had grown into one of the most determined souls the village had ever known. His world existed in perpetual darkness, yet his spirit burned brighter than the forge fires that shaped the finest weapons in all of Nordvik. Born without sight, he had learned to navigate life through a symphony of sounds, textures, and scents that painted vivid pictures in his mind. The rhythmic pounding of hammers against anvils told him when the blacksmiths were crafting new tools. The distinct footsteps of each villager revealed their identity long before they spoke. The changing direction of the wind brought news of approaching weather, visiting ships, and the mood of the sea itself. His father, Olaf, had been a renowned navigator in his younger days, leading expeditions across treacherous waters to distant lands filled with wonder and opportunity. The weathered man's hands bore the scars of countless adventures, and his eyes held the wisdom of someone who had witnessed both the beauty and the fury of the world beyond their shores. "The sun rises with unusual warmth today," Olaf observed, stepping outside their home to gather firewood for the morning meal. His voice carried the gentle authority of a man who had learned to find strength in quiet moments. "Can you feel it on your face?" The young warrior nodded, already dressed in his simple woolen tunic and leather vest, his hand resting on the carved wooden staff that served as both walking aid and weapon. Over the years, he had learned to carve intricate patterns into the wood, creating a surface that told stories through touch alone. Each groove and curve represented a memory, a lesson learned, or a dream for the future. "The village will be busy today," he replied, tilting his head to listen to the distant sounds of preparation echoing from the main square. "The fishing boats return before dawn, and I can hear the crews unloading their catch. The harvest celebration approaches." Olaf smiled with paternal pride. His son's ability to interpret the world around him never ceased to amaze him. Where others might see only disability, he witnessed a unique gift that allowed the young man to perceive details that escaped even the most observant-sighted individuals. "Would you like to visit the training grounds today?" Olaf suggested, knowing that his son found solace in the rhythmic practice of combat techniques, even though many of the other warriors initially questioned his presence there. The training grounds of Nordvik were situated on a flat expanse of earth just beyond the village proper, surrounded by tall wooden posts driven deep into the ground. Here, the young men and women of the community gathered each day to hone their skills with sword, axe, and shield. The constant ring of metal against metal, the thud of weapons striking wooden targets, and the encouraging shouts of instructors created an environment where strength and technique were forged together. When the young warrior first appeared at the training grounds several seasons ago, many of the established fighters had regarded him with skepticism. How could someone who could not see hope to master the complex choreography of combat? How could he anticipate an opponent's moves or properly position himself for both attack and defense? Those doubts began to dissolve as they witnessed his unique approach to martial training. Unable to rely on visual cues, he had developed an almost supernatural awareness of sound and movement. The whistle of an approaching blade through the air told him its speed and trajectory. The subtle shift of weight in an opponent's stance revealed their intended direction of attack. The pattern of breathing indicated whether a fighter was tired, confident, or preparing for a desperate gambit. "I would welcome the practice," he replied to his father's suggestion. "Yesterday, Thorstein mentioned wanting to work on defensive maneuvers, and I believe I can offer some insights that might prove helpful." Thorstein was one of the few warriors who had embraced the young man's presence at the training grounds without reservation. A skilled fighter in his own right, Thorstein had quickly recognized that combat techniques could be learned and improved through methods that went far beyond simple observation. The partnership between the two had become legendary among their peers, with Thorstein's visual expertise complementing his friend's extraordinary sensory abilities. As they prepared to make their way toward the training grounds, the peaceful morning routine was suddenly interrupted by a sound that sent chills through every resident of Nordvik. It started as a low, rumbling roar that seemed to emanate from the very earth itself, growing in intensity until it echoed off the surrounding cliffs and mountains like the voice of an ancient god awakening from slumber. The young warrior's hand tightened around his staff as every muscle in his body tensed with alertness. This was no sound from the natural world he knew so well. It carried with it an otherworldly quality that spoke of power beyond anything he had ever encountered. "Father," he said quietly, his voice steady despite the evident concern in his tone. That sound came from the direction of the old cave system near the northern cliffs. Olaf's face had grown pale, and his eyes scanned the horizon with the urgency of a man who had sailed through storms and lived to tell the tale. "I have heard such a sound only once before, many years ago, when I was exploring the remote islands far to the east. The local inhabitants spoke of creatures from the ancient times, beings of legend that were both feared and revered." Before they could discuss the matter further, the village bell began to toll with the rapid, urgent pattern that signaled immediate danger. This was not the slow, measured chime that called people to gather for announcements or celebrations. This was the alarm that had not been sounded in living memory, a warning that something threatened the very safety of their community. Villagers began to emerge from their homes, many still dressed in sleeping clothes, their faces etched with confusion and growing fear. Parents called for their children to stay close, while the more experienced warriors instinctively reached for weapons that might prove inadequate against whatever had produced that otherworldly roar. The village elder, a woman whose wisdom had guided Nordvik through numerous crises over the decades, appeared in the central square. Her silver hair caught the morning light as she raised her staff for attention, her voice carrying clearly over the murmur of worried conversations. "People of Nordvik," she called, her tone commanding immediate silence. "A creature of unknown origin has taken residence in the northern caves. Our scouts report that it appears to be a young dragon, though unlike any described in the old stories. It has already destroyed several fishing nets left to dry near the cliffs, and its presence threatens our ability to harvest the coastal waters safely." The crowd erupted in nervous whispers. Dragons were creatures of legend, beings that existed in the stories told around winter fires and the ancient songs passed down through generations. To learn that such a creature now dwelt so close to their home was both terrifying and fascinating. "What do the warriors recommend?" called out Henrik, the village's master shipbuilder, his voice reflecting the practical concern of a man whose livelihood depended on safe access to the sea. Several of Nordvik's most respected fighters stepped forward, their expressions grave with the weight of responsibility. These were men and women who had faced human enemies in battle, who had defended their community against raiders and wild beasts, but none had ever contemplated confronting a creature from the realm of myth and legend. "We have observed the creature from a safe distance," reported Sven, whose reputation as a tracker was unmatched throughout the region. "It appears to be young, perhaps recently separated from its parents, but even a hatchling dragon possesses strength and abilities that far exceed any opponent we have previously encountered." Our weapons may not prove effective against its scales," added Ingrid, a shield maiden whose tactical knowledge was as sharp as her blade, "and we cannot predict its behavior or abilities based on any previous experience." The young warrior listened to these discussions with growing interest rather than fear. While others heard descriptions of an insurmountable threat, he perceived an opportunity to understand something extraordinary. His mind began to work through the possibilities, analyzing what little information had been shared and considering approaches that others might overlook. "Has anyone attempted to communicate with the creature?" he asked, his question cutting through the strategic discussions with unexpected directness. The gathered warriors turned toward him, with expressions ranging from surprise to skepticism. The idea of attempting communication with a dragon seemed to border on madness, yet there was something in his tone that suggested serious consideration rather than foolish bravado. "Communication," Sven repeated, his eyebrows raised in disbelief. "This is a wild beast, not a lost traveler seeking directions." "Perhaps," the young warrior replied thoughtfully, "but if the creature is truly young and separated from its kind, it may be acting out of fear rather than malice. A frightened child, whether human or dragon, often behaves in ways that appear threatening but actually represent calls for help." The village elder studied him with the intense gaze of someone evaluating a potentially dangerous but intriguing proposition. Her years of experience had taught her to recognize wisdom that might appear in unexpected forms, and she sensed that this young man's unique perspective might offer insights that traditional warriors would miss. "What would you propose?" she asked, her question carrying the weight of genuine curiosity rather than dismissive challenge. "Allow me to approach the creature," he said simply. "My inability to see might actually prove advantageous in this situation. Dragons are said to be proud beings, and a sighted person's natural instinct would be to assess the creature's size, power, and potential threat level. Such evaluation might be interpreted as a challenge or sign of aggression. I would approach without preconceptions, guided only by what the creature chooses to reveal about itself." The proposal sent a wave of concerned murmurs through the crowd. Many villagers had grown fond of the young warrior despite his differences, and the thought of sending him to face a dragon seemed like condemning him to certain doom. Others, however, began to recognize the unique logic of his suggestion. Thorstein stepped forward, his loyalty to his training partner evident in his determined expression. "I volunteer to accompany him. My eyes can watch for dangers that his other senses might miss, while his approach guides our interaction with the creature." "This is madness," protested Gunnar, a veteran warrior whose scars told stories of numerous battles. "We should gather our strongest fighters and drive the beast away through coordinated attack, not send two young men to have a conversation with a creature of legend." The debate continued for several more minutes, with valid arguments presented on multiple sides. Some villagers advocated for immediate aggressive action, believing that showing strength was the only language a dragon would understand. Others suggested abandoning the northern coastal areas entirely until the creature moved on to other territory. Throughout these discussions, the young warrior remained calm and thoughtful, listening carefully to each perspective while maintaining his conviction that a peaceful approach offered the best chance for a positive resolution. He understood the risks involved, but he also sensed an opportunity that might never come again. Finally, the village elder raised her staff once more, calling for silence. Her decision would carry the authority of decades of leadership and the respect of every person present. "The approach suggested by our young warrior carries great risk," she acknowledged, "but it also offers the possibility of a solution that does not require us to either abandon our homes or engage in a battle we might not survive. I grant permission for this attempt, with the understanding that retreat remains an option if the situation becomes untenable." She turned to address the young warrior directly, her eyes reflecting both concern and confidence. "You will not go alone, and you will not go unprepared. Thorstein will accompany you, along with two of our most experienced archers positioned at a safe distance. At the first sign of genuine aggression from the creature, you will withdraw immediately." The young warrior nodded his acceptance of these conditions, understanding that they represented a compromise between his preferred approach and the community's need to ensure reasonable safety measures. He was grateful for the opportunity to attempt communication with the dragon, and he recognized that the additional precautions might actually prove beneficial rather than hindering. As the crowd began to disperse, people returning to their homes to prepare for what might prove to be a historic day in the life of Nordvik, the young warrior spent time carefully preparing his equipment. His staff received fresh carvings that would help him navigate unfamiliar terrain, and he selected a small leather pouch filled with dried fish and bread that could serve as potential offerings of goodwill. Thorstein busied himself with checking his own gear, ensuring that his sword was sharp and his shield properly secured. The two archers selected for the mission, Astrid and Leif, began preparing their bows and selecting arrows that would be most effective if defensive action became necessary. Word of the planned expedition spread quickly throughout Nordvik, and by midday, a significant portion of the village had gathered to witness the departure of what many considered either a diplomatic mission or a fool's errand. The young warrior felt the weight of their expectations and concerns, but he also drew strength from their support. His father approached as the final preparations were being completed, carrying a small wooden carving that the young warrior recognized by touch as one of his earliest attempts at artistic expression. It was a simple representation of a sailing ship, carved during the long winter evenings when he had first begun learning to shape wood with his hands. "Carry this with you," Olaf said quietly, pressing the carving into his son's palm. "It represents the journeys we take not because they are easy, but because they lead us toward understanding we could not achieve by remaining in familiar waters." The young warrior smiled, tucking the carving safely into his vest. The familiar weight and texture of the wood provided a comforting connection to home and family, a reminder that courage was not the absence of fear, but the willingness to act despite uncertainty. As the small expedition prepared to depart for the northern caves, the young warrior took a moment to center himself mentally and emotionally. He knew that the next few hours might change not only his own life, but potentially the entire relationship between the village of Nordvik and the mysterious creature that had appeared in their territory. The path leading toward the northern cliffs was one he had traveled before, though never with such momentous purpose. His feet found the familiar rhythm of walking over uneven ground, while his staff helped him navigate around rocks and depressions that could prove treacherous. Behind him, Thorstein matched his pace, occasionally offering quiet descriptions of the surrounding landscape that might prove relevant to their mission. The journey to the northern caves took nearly 2 hours, winding through terrain that grew increasingly rugged as they moved away from the comfortable familiarity of the village. The young warrior's enhanced senses painted vivid pictures of their surroundings, through sound, scent, and the feel of changing air currents against his skin. The path began as a well-worn track used by villagers gathering driftwood and seaweed from the rocky shoreline. Gradually, it narrowed to little more than a deer trail, requiring careful navigation around boulder formations and through patches of thorny undergrowth that caught at their clothing and required patient untangling. "The cave opening is visible now," Thorstein reported quietly, his voice carrying a note of awe that immediately caught his companion's attention. "It's larger than I expected, easily tall enough for 3 men standing on each other's shoulders. The entrance is framed by 2 massive stone pillars that look almost deliberately placed, as if this were a doorway rather than a natural formation." The young warrior nodded, processing this information while simultaneously analyzing the symphony of sounds that reached his ears. The familiar crash of waves against rocks had grown more distant, replaced by an odd acoustic phenomenon that suggested they were approaching a space where sound behaved differently than in the open air. "I can hear an echo pattern that suggests the cave system extends much deeper than the entrance would indicate," he observed. The air currents are also unusual. There's a warmth coming from within that doesn't match the coastal climate. As they drew closer to the cave entrance, both men became aware of a low, rhythmic sound that seemed to pulse like a giant heartbeat. It was neither threatening nor welcoming, simply present as a constant reminder that they were entering the domain of something extraordinary. The two archers who had accompanied them took positions behind a cluster of large rocks, approximately 50 yards from the cave entrance, close enough to provide assistance if needed, but far enough away to avoid provoking the creature through their presence. Astrid gave a subtle hand signal indicating that she had a clear view of the cave mouth and could provide covering fire if the situation deteriorated. "Are you ready for this?" Thorstein asked quietly, his hand resting on the pommel of his sword, not in preparation for battle, but as a source of comfort in an inherently uncertain situation. The young warrior took a deep breath, centering himself in the way he had learned during years of meditation and training. His world had always required him to trust in senses and instincts that others took for granted, and now those same abilities would be put to their ultimate test. "I am as ready as anyone can be for something that has never been attempted before," he replied with a slight smile. "Remember, we are not here as conquerors or challengers. We are visitors, seeking understanding rather than conflict." They began their approach to the cave entrance, moving slowly and deliberately to avoid any actions that might be interpreted as aggressive. The young warrior kept his staff in a clearly non-threatening position, using it for balance and navigation, rather than as a potential weapon. As they crossed the threshold into the cave, the temperature difference became immediately noticeable. The interior was significantly warmer than the coastal air outside, and the atmosphere carried scents that were entirely unfamiliar, a mixture of mineral odors from deep rock formations and something else entirely, something that spoke of ancient power and otherworldly presence. The acoustics of the cave were extraordinary. Every footstep, every whispered word, every subtle movement of clothing created echoes that seemed to dance around the stone walls before returning transformed and layered with harmonic overtones. The young warrior found himself naturally adjusting his movements to work with these acoustic properties rather than against them. "The cavern opens into a much larger space ahead," Thorstein reported in barely audible tones. "I can see the glow of some kind of light source deeper within, though I cannot determine its origin." They continued forward carefully, their progress measured in careful steps rather than confident strides. The young warrior's enhanced hearing began to detect additional layers of sound, the subtle drip of water from stalactites, the whisper of air currents moving through hidden passages, and underneath it all, that rhythmic pulsing that seemed to grow stronger as they penetrated deeper into the cave system. Then, without warning, they heard it, a sound unlike anything in their previous experience. It began as a low rumble, similar to the roar that had awakened the village that morning, but as they listened, it began to resolve into patterns that suggested structure and intention rather than random vocalization. "It knows we are here," the young warrior whispered, his voice carrying a mixture of excitement and apprehension. "And I believe it is trying to communicate." The sound came again, this time with distinct variations in tone and rhythm that reminded both men of the complex patterns used in human speech. It was as if the creature were attempting to bridge the gap between its natural form of communication and something that visiting humans might be able to understand. "Should we respond?" Thorstein asked, his tactical training warring with fascination at what they were experiencing. The young warrior considered this carefully. In all the legends and stories he had heard about dragons, there were references to their intelligence and capacity for communication, but no specific guidance about proper protocols for first contact. He would have to trust his instincts and hope that his intentions would be understood regardless of any mistakes in procedure. He cleared his throat softly and spoke in a voice that projected calm confidence rather than fear or aggression. "We are visitors to your domain. We come seeking understanding, not conflict. If you are willing, we would welcome the opportunity to speak with you." The response was immediate and startling in its complexity. The creature's voice, for it was clearly a voice now, rather than simply vocalization, carried layers of meaning that seemed to bypass normal hearing and speak directly to their minds and hearts. The words, when they came, were in the ancient language that appeared in the oldest songs and stories, yet somehow both men understood them perfectly. Few among the surface dwellers possess the wisdom to approach with open hearts rather than drawn weapons. The dragon's voice resonated through the cavern. "Fewer still would choose to enter my sanctuary, led by one who sees with senses other than sight. You interest me, young warriors." Thorstein's hand had moved instinctively toward his sword at the first sound of the dragon's voice, but the young warrior's calm demeanor helped steady his nerves. This was clearly not a creature preparing for attack, but rather one engaging in the kind of careful evaluation that preceded important conversations. "We represent the village of Nordvik," the young warrior replied, his voice growing stronger with confidence. "Your presence near our community has caused concern, but we hope that understanding might replace fear if communication is possible. Step forward into the light, that I might see you more clearly," the dragon requested, its tone carrying curiosity rather than command. The two men advanced carefully until they emerged into a natural chamber that took their breath away. The cavern was vast, easily large enough to house the entire village of Nordvik, with a ceiling that disappeared into shadows high above. The walls were lined with crystals that caught and reflected light from a source that gradually became clear as their eyes adjusted to the luminous environment. In the center of the chamber, resting on what appeared to be a bed of carefully arranged stones and precious metals, lay a dragon unlike anything described in the traditional legends. Rather than the massive, terrifying creature of warrior tales, this was clearly a young dragon, perhaps equivalent to an adolescent human in terms of development and maturity. Its scales were a deep emerald green that shifted to golden bronze along the edges, creating a pattern that seemed to flow like liquid metal in the crystal-reflected light. The creature's head was elegantly proportioned, with large, intelligent eyes that regarded them with unmistakable curiosity and careful evaluation. Most remarkably, the dragon's size was impressive, but not overwhelming, perhaps twice the length of a war horse, with wings that were currently folded against its body in a posture that suggested relaxation rather than preparation for flight or attack. "You are not what I expected," Thorstein admitted honestly, his previous fear giving way to fascination with the creature's obvious intelligence and dignified presence. The dragon's equivalent of a smile played around the corners of its mouth, revealing teeth that were certainly formidable, but were not being displayed in a threatening manner. "Nor are you what I expected from the surface dwellers. Most of your kind who have discovered my presence have responded with shouting and aggressive posturing. You approach with respect and genuine curiosity." The young warrior stepped forward slightly, his enhanced senses painting a detailed picture of the dragon through sound, scent, and the subtle air currents created by the creature's breathing. "May I ask how you came to be in these caves? The village elders say that no dragon has been seen in this region for many generations." The dragon's expression grew more serious, and when it spoke again, there was a note of sadness that touched both men's hearts. "I am indeed separated from my family, not by choice, but by circumstances that I am still learning to understand. My parents sent me away from our ancestral home when dangers arose that threatened all our kind. I was told to seek safety in the remote northern lands, where the old magic still flows strong through the earth and water." "You are alone here?" the young warrior asked gently, recognizing the pain of isolation in the dragon's tone. "I have been alone for many months now," the dragon confirmed. "It has been difficult. Dragons are not solitary creatures by nature. We live in family groups, sharing knowledge and stories, teaching the young ones about the ancient ways and the deep connections between all living things." Thorstein found himself moved by the dragon's evident loneliness. The creature's situation was not so different from that of a human youth separated from family and community, trying to navigate an uncertain world without the guidance and support that normally shaped such development. "The fishing nets that were damaged," the young warrior said carefully. "Were you trying to obtain food, or was there another reason for your interaction with them?" The dragon looked somewhat embarrassed, a surprisingly human-like expression on its reptilian features. "I was curious about the construction patterns. Dragon craftsmanship uses different techniques, and I wanted to understand how surface dwellers approach the challenge of capturing fish efficiently. I may have been less careful than I should have been in my examination of the nets." "You were studying our technology?" Thorstein asked with amazement. "You mean you weren't attacking or trying to establish dominance over the fishing grounds?" "Attack?" The dragon seemed genuinely puzzled by this interpretation. "Why would I attack people who have done me no harm? I was simply trying to understand the world I now inhabit. In my eagerness to learn, I caused unintended damage, and for that I am truly sorry." The young warrior felt a surge of excitement as he realized that their peaceful approach had been exactly right. This creature was not a threat to be defeated, but a displaced individual seeking understanding and connection in an unfamiliar environment. "Would you be willing to meet with representatives from our village?" he asked hopefully. "I believe there are many misunderstandings that could be resolved through direct communication, and perhaps we might find ways to help each other." The dragon considered this proposal carefully, its intelligent eyes moving between the two men as it evaluated their sincerity and the potential risks and benefits of greater contact with the human community. "Your approach gives me hope that such meetings might prove beneficial rather than disastrous," the dragon finally replied. "But I must share something with you that may change your perspective on what such an alliance might mean." The dragon rose to its feet, revealing the full grace and power of its form, while still maintaining the non-threatening posture that had characterized their entire interaction. When it spoke again, its voice carried the weight of ancient knowledge and profound responsibility. "I am not merely a young dragon seeking temporary shelter in your territory. I am the last keeper of knowledge that your people have lost. Knowledge that was once shared between humans and dragons in the distant past, when our kinds lived in harmony and mutual respect." The two men exchanged glances, sensing that they were about to learn something that would change their understanding, not only of their current situation, but of their own history and heritage. Long ago, before the great forgetting that separated our peoples, humans and dragons worked together to maintain the balance of the natural world, the dragon continued. Dragons served as guardians of ancient wisdom, while humans provided innovation and adaptation that helped both species thrive in changing environments. "What happened to end this cooperation?" the young warrior asked, his voice reflecting deep interest in this revelation. "Fear, misunderstanding, and the gradual loss of the old ways," the dragon explained sadly. "As human settlements grew larger and more complex, the need for cooperation with other species seemed less important. Dragons retreated to remote areas to preserve the ancient knowledge, while humans developed new traditions that no longer included room for our partnership." Thorstein was struggling to absorb the implications of what they were learning. "You're saying that our ancestors once lived and worked alongside dragons as partners rather than enemies." "Not just partners," the dragon corrected gently. "Family." The bonds between humans and dragons in the ancient times were so close that the two species shared not only knowledge and territory, but bloodlines and destiny. Some of your villagers carry dragon heritage in their lineage, though this knowledge has been lost to living memory. The young warrior felt a strange resonance in these words, as if they awakened memories that existed somewhere deeper than conscious thought. His unique perception of the world, his ability to navigate by senses other than sight, his instinctive connection with the natural environment, could these traits have origins more complex than simple adaptation to his condition? "How can we restore this knowledge?" he asked. "How can we bridge the gap that has grown between our peoples?" The dragon's eyes brightened with hope and determination. "That is why I believe our meeting was not coincidence, but destiny. You approached me without fear, seeing potential for understanding rather than assuming threat. Such vision suggests that the old bonds might indeed be restored, beginning with individuals who possess the wisdom to look beyond surface appearances." What would such restoration require?" Thorstein asked, caught up in the possibilities that this conversation was revealing. "Patience, courage, and willingness to relearn truths that have been forgotten," the dragon replied. "It would mean acknowledging that the world contains wonders and possibilities beyond what current human society considers normal or acceptable. It would require individuals willing to serve as bridges between the old ways and the new, carrying ancient wisdom forward into a future where humans and dragons once again work together for the benefit of all living things." The young warrior felt destiny calling to him with a clarity that surpassed anything he had ever experienced. His entire life had prepared him for this moment. His unique perspective, his ability to perceive truth through means other than conventional sight, his natural inclination to seek understanding rather than dominance. "I am willing to serve as such a bridge," he declared, his voice carrying the conviction of absolute commitment. "Whatever risks or challenges such a path might involve, I believe this knowledge must be preserved and shared." The dragon studied him intently, and when it spoke again, its voice carried the formal weight of ancient ritual. To accept such responsibility requires more than willingness. It requires transformation that will change not only how others see you, but how you understand your own nature and purpose. "What kind of transformation?" Thorstein asked, concern for his friend evident in his tone. "The awakening of dormant heritage," the dragon explained. "The young warrior carries dragon blood from generations past, blood that has remained inactive until now. To serve as a bridge between our peoples, this heritage must be awakened, bringing with it abilities and responsibilities that will set him apart from other humans." The cave fell silent, except for the steady drip of water and the subtle whisper of air currents moving through hidden passages. The weight of decision hung in the air like incense, demanding careful consideration of consequences that would extend far beyond the present moment. The young warrior closed his eyes, though the gesture made no practical difference to his perception of the world, and reached deep into his heart for the answer that felt most true to his essential nature. When he opened his eyes again, his expression reflected calm certainty. "I accept whatever transformation is necessary," he said quietly. "If I carry dragon heritage, then awakening it serves not only the restoration of ancient knowledge, but the fulfillment of my own deepest purpose." The dragon nodded with solemn approval, then began to glow with a soft, golden light that seemed to emanate from within its scales. The light grew brighter, filling the entire cavern with warmth and energy that spoke of magic older than recorded history. "Place your hand upon my heart," the dragon instructed, "and prepare to remember who you truly are." As the young warrior stepped forward and placed his palm against the warm scales above the dragon's heart, the world exploded into sensation and memory that transcended anything he had ever experienced. Images, emotions, and knowledge that belonged to ancestors long forgotten flooded through his consciousness like a river breaking through a dam. He saw the ancient world as it truly was, when dragons soared above human settlements, not as conquerors, but as protectors and partners. He experienced the deep connection between species that had made both humans and dragons stronger and wiser than either could be alone. He felt the sorrow of separation and the hope of reunion that had sustained dragonkind through centuries of isolation. And most importantly, he understood his own nature in a way that gave meaning to every challenge and triumph of his previous life. His blindness was not a disability, but a gift that allowed him to perceive the world as dragons did, through senses that transcended physical sight to encompass deeper truths about the connections between all living things. When the transformation was complete, the young warrior stood changed in ways that were both profound and subtle. To Thorstein's eyes, his friend appeared physically unchanged, yet there was something in his posture and expression that spoke of newfound power and ancient wisdom awakening within him. "How do you feel?" the dragon asked gently, its voice now carrying harmonics that the young warrior could hear and understand on levels previously impossible. "I feel complete," he replied, his own voice carrying new depths of meaning and authority. "As if I have been living as half of myself my entire life, and only now understand what wholeness truly means. The awakening brings with it responsibilities that extend beyond personal fulfillment," the dragon continued. "You are now bound to serve as protector of the ancient knowledge, teacher of the old ways, and bridge between human and dragon societies. Are you prepared for such service?" "I am," the young warrior replied without hesitation. "But I cannot fulfill such responsibilities alone. I will need allies among both humans and dragons who share the vision of restored harmony between our peoples." The dragon smiled, its expression reflecting deep satisfaction with this response. "Wisdom already grows within you. The path ahead will indeed require allies, and I believe that your village may provide the first of these partnerships." "What do you suggest as our next step?" Thorstein asked, still processing the extraordinary events he had witnessed. "Return to your village," the dragon replied. "Share what you have learned, but do so carefully. Not all humans are ready to accept the truth about dragon heritage and the possibility of restored alliance. Begin with those who have already shown wisdom and openness to new ideas." The young warrior nodded, understanding that the delicate work of bridge building would require patience and careful judgment. The transformation he had undergone provided him with knowledge and abilities, but wisdom in their application would come only through experience and careful observation of how others responded to these revolutionary ideas. "Will you remain here while we begin this work?" he asked the dragon. "For now, yes," the dragon confirmed. "This cavern provides safety and solitude for deeper study of the ancient texts and artifacts that I have brought from my family's treasury. When the time is right for more direct contact with your village, you will know, and I will be ready." As the two men prepared to begin their journey back to Nordvik, the young warrior felt the weight of destiny settling around his shoulders like a cloak of both honor and responsibility. The simple young man who had awakened that morning was gone forever, replaced by someone who carried within himself the seeds of transformation that might change the world. "Thank you for this gift," he said to the dragon, his voice carrying gratitude that encompassed not only personal transformation, but hope for the future of both their peoples. "Thank you for having the courage to accept it," the dragon replied. "The road ahead will be challenging, but for the first time in centuries, I believe that the ancient bonds between humans and dragons may truly be restored." 6 months after that fateful meeting in the northern caves, the village of Nordvik had become something unprecedented in the known world. A community where humans and dragons lived and worked together in harmony that echoed the ancient partnerships of forgotten ages. The young warrior, now recognized as the bridge keeper between the two species, had carefully guided the process of introduction and integration. His enhanced abilities, awakened through dragon magic, allowed him to serve as translator not only of languages, but of customs, needs, and perspectives that had remained foreign to each species for countless generations. The dragon, who had chosen the name Ember of Ancient Wisdom for formal occasions, but preferred simply Ember in daily conversation, had proven to be an invaluable member of the community. Its knowledge of weather patterns, ocean currents, and seasonal changes had revolutionized the village's fishing and farming practices, leading to unprecedented prosperity and food security. More importantly, Ember's presence had awakened dormant dragon heritage in 3 other villages, creating a small group of bridge keepers who could facilitate expanded contact with other dragon communities that had remained hidden throughout the northern territories. The transformation of Nordvik attracted attention from neighboring settlements, some curious and hopeful, others fearful and hostile. The bridge keepers found themselves serving not only as intermediaries between humans and dragons, but as ambassadors for a new way of living that challenged centuries of misunderstanding and separation. On this particular morning, as the young warrior stood on the cliffs overlooking the sea, where dragon and human fishing crews worked side by side, he reflected on how completely his understanding of purpose and possibility had been transformed by that single act of choosing courage over fear, understanding over conflict. Thorstein, now serving as captain of the first joint human-dragon exploration vessel, approached with news from their latest voyage to the distant islands where other dragon communities were rumored to exist. "We've made contact with the Coral Scale clan," Thorstein reported excitedly. "They're interested in sending an ambassador to visit Nordvik and learn about our partnership model. It seems word of our success is spreading faster than we anticipated." The young warrior smiled, feeling the deep satisfaction that comes from witnessing seeds of hope taking root and beginning to flourish. The path ahead remained challenging, with many obstacles and setbacks still to overcome. But the foundation had been laid for a future where cooperation replaced conflict and ancient wisdom guided innovation. As Ember emerged from the harbor, where it had been helping repair fishing nets damaged in the previous day's storm, the bridgekeeper felt the profound gratitude that comes from understanding one's true purpose in life. His blindness, once seen as a limitation, had become the key to perceiving possibilities that others missed. His willingness to approach the unknown with curiosity rather than fear had opened doorways to transformation that would benefit generations yet to come. The story that began with a young warrior choosing to face a dragon had become the first chapter in the restoration of an ancient alliance, proving that sometimes the greatest adventures begin not with the drawing of swords, but with the opening of hearts to possibilities beyond our wildest dreams. In the distance, other dragons could be seen approaching the village, drawn by reports of a place where their kind was welcomed as family rather than feared as enemies. The age of partnership was beginning anew, and at its center stood a young man who had discovered that true sight comes not from the eyes, but from the courage to see the world as it could be, rather than as it appears to be. The future stretched ahead, filled with promise, adventure, and the endless possibilities that emerge when different peoples choose cooperation over conflict, understanding over fear, and hope over despair. The blind warrior had not only found his dragon companion, he had helped both their peoples rediscover the ancient bonds that made them stronger together than either could ever be alone.